2023 has been a huge year for women's sport, with 4 World Cup tournaments in the space of 8 months. The year starting off with the Under-19 Women's T20 World Cup hosted in South Africa, the inaugural Under-19 Women's T20 World Cup. That was followed by the Senior Women's T20 World Cup, also hosted here in South Africa, which saw the Proteas women making history by reaching the final. Of course, they went on to lose to the best team in the world, Australia. And then there was July. It brought the FIFA Women's World Cup and the Netball World Cup, both of which proved to be a resounding success. And that's in terms of Banyana Banyana's historic performance in Australia and New Zealand, and Cape Town's hosting of the very first Netball World Cup on African soil. Now, with all of these milestones in women's sport, there are still telling disparities between them and their male counterparts. Women are paid far less than men, they are sponsored a whole lot less, and they do not receive great media coverage. So, to help me unpack these challenges is the Springbok women's captain, Babalwa Latsha, who's joining us via Zoom from Cape Town. And in studio with me is Sindiwe Mbiko, who is the portfolio lead for group public relations at Momentum. Babalwa, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time, and you too, Sindiwe. Thank you for making time to come in so early in the morning. Sindiwe, I'm going to start with you, since you are here with me in studio. That intro speaks to something I think is disturbing, to say that 1 year, 4 World Cups, 3 of them in South Africa, 2 of them, making history, essentially, where the women have, and I genuinely hate comparing, but the comparisons must be made for the purposes of putting across a point. The women in cricket and football have done what the men in cricket and football have never done, and yet the men are getting all the support, right? There are reasons for that, and I've heard them many a time. Do you see us ever getting to a point where the woman is shown the respect financially and by media coverage that she deserves?
Absolutely. I think the potential is there. I just think from a sponsorship perspective, it's one of those sort of issues that need to have a very creative approach. So right now, when you look at, when corporate look at sponsorships, it's all about the numbers. It's about visibility, which, as we all know, is a current problem when it comes to women in sports. So I think from a visibility perspective and how we're able to close the sponsorship gap, I think corporates would need to be a lot more creative than they currently are, because it's essentially an issue of a chicken and the egg. Do we first sponsor them and hope that they get to a place where the visibility is high, or do we wait for the visibility to get high until we sponsor them? But we also know that without sponsorship, they won't be able to get to the level at which the corporates can actually gain any kind of return on investments. So it's a tricky one, but it's definitely one that can be addressed if someone actually has a long-term view and a long-term plan in terms of how we approach it, because it's also not sustainable. And it's not just a South African problem, it's a global issue. I mean, just to give you a slight and sort of descriptor of how bad it is, women make up 40% of sports players globally, but they only get 1% of sponsorship. So if we don't close that gap, you can imagine the sort of the knock-on effect it will have to women, upcoming women in sports, and the pipeline when it comes to women in sports and getting careers from that. Yeah.
Babalwa, a lot of sports fans, avid sports fans, say you guys don't essentially play, attractive sport compared to the men. That's why we don't come to the stadia to watch you. And sponsorship says you guys don't bring in the numbers in the stadia, that's why we can't back you. But then you guys are saying, imagine if you backed us so that we can actually develop from grassroots level and actually get to, if not close to, the level of men's sport. But let's also not forget that men are built differently from women. So that's also another thing where you can't expect a woman to, essentially do as much as a man can, even though it can be possible. But you listen to that as an athlete, where someone is like, yeah, we can't watch women's rugby because, you guys are not as entertaining as the male Springboks. And yet you're saying we are not developed the same way.
Towards a misconception. All of that is relative. Obviously, men will play their type of rugby, which is relevant to their physiques and their output, and we play our rugby also relevant to our physiques and outputs. If anything, women's rugby is much more entertaining in my view, because there's a lot more show of skill than brute muscle in comparison to the men. But I think much of what the problem is, Usisi has already addressed in that. I think that it's about showing it more than anything, in order for people to see that it is actually marketable, it is entertaining. Then hopefully they will then migrate to stadiums. But again, it speaks to who gets to see it, how can they access it. Do you switch on your television and the first thing you see is women's rugby? Do you read about it? So I think we need a holistic approach in terms of having media come on board, having potential sponsorships come on board, and even the players themselves, to put our talents and our brand of rugby out there as much as possible. I think we've made some significant strides over the, say, past 10 years, but I think we still have a long way to go.
You've got Banyana reaching the knockout stages of a FIFA World Cup in only their second tournament historically, whereas the men have been to 3 World Cups, and then you've got the Proteas women reaching the final of any World Cup, T20 or 50 over, for the first time, and the men have still not done it, and yet the men have been playing, at the highest level since 1992, our readmission. And Sindiwe was saying it is that, do we sponsor you first, hoping that the results do come, or do we wait for the results to come and then we sponsor you? But then Banyana and the Proteas women will say, here are the results. We have done what our male counterparts have never done. Give us some money.
It is quite tricky, in all honesty. I think that the Blue Bulls Daisies in South African women's rugby were or are the first women's side to be fully professional, and they've yielded quite significant results in that they've won the women's Premier Division last night. And so it speaks to us being, if you are sponsored first, I believe that results will come, because then you earn better. If you earn better, that means you can take care of your body better. You have less to worry about. You can focus purely on rugby and nothing else. So I think that I speak purely from a sportswoman's perspective, in that sponsor us first, invest in us first, and then you get your return on investment as time goes.
What role does federations play in this discourse that we're having, Sindiwe, in terms of no women's sport in this country is professional? I'm talking rugby. In fact, the Daisies, the Bulls Daisies, they're a professional team, but that's because they've got that financial backing, from the owners of the Bulls. But just in large part, women's sport, hockey, cricket, football, none of it is professional in this country, and yet you're seeing the results in cricket and football that you're seeing. You're seeing, the Springbok women who've also grown in leaps and bounds in terms of their participation on the world stage, even in sevens level. What role can federations play? How much more can federations do to ensure that, they professionalize the sport, even if it is without that financial backing that they are so desperate for?
I think the ecosystem is a lot more complicated than just financing. And yes, the federations play a huge role, because I think from a professionalizing perspective, it allows for investments from a grassroots level. Because what we're finding a lot of is we have women who play sports, but the minute they get to professional level, they actually then stop playing, because it doesn't become sort of financially viable. And I think the absence of these leagues that should be existing can actually then mitigate that. Because if you are playing, yes, when you start playing, you're playing because of the talent and the passion. But let's be honest, we're also playing because we're hoping that they're viable career options. But if that does not exist and it's not put in place, then it doesn't become viable for the women to keep playing and to keep to reach professional levels. So yes, there definitely is an opportunity for federations to professionalize sport. But again, I think they will come back with the whole, where's the money going to come from? So the financial backing is very important. But also it's understanding that it's not just a federation's responsibility. There are so many of us in this ecosystem that can do something to help close this gap. More people can watch and buy tickets for female sports. That's also what raises their visibility, and that's also what closes the gap. Corporates, again, have a better look or a more creative approach to sponsorship. And even the ladies themselves, how do they turn their talents into a brand? Because if you look at all of the other, especially males, you have the likes of Beckham still earning a salary even though he hasn't kicked a ball in years. Why? Because he was able to make a brand out of himself. And that's what attracts endorsements and gives the players' futures a little bit of more longevity when it comes to financial position.
You guys have and continue to play your part in ensuring that there is the development and the support of women's sport. I mean, it is now proven in the history that I speak of with the Proteas women. You know, you've been by their side, like, you know, our biggest fuel brand here in South Africa, Sasol, has been by the side of Banyana Banyana, and it has bore fruit.
Absolutely.
We haven't won World Cups yet, but it has definitely bore fruit. You guys are now launching the inaugural Women Who Make Moves in Sport Summit. Talk to me about that and what it is you're hoping it achieves.
Sure. So our relationship with Momentum Proteas started in 2013. And again, it was one of those chances we had to take. We saw a gap and we filled it. We had no idea that the ecosystem was so big and the need was so big. And we knew that we couldn't fill it. I mean, resources are limited, but we also understood that a lot more needed to be done. So the Women Who Make Moves in Sports Summit was the first this year. And essentially it was, again, speaking to the previous points, how do we equip the ladies with the right skills in order to create brands from themselves so that they are also able to attract sponsorship and endorsements? Because we understand that there already is a payment gap. That already exists. But with the sponsorship gap, we felt that there's something that we could actually do. So we put together a 2-day summit from the 8th and the 9th of August, where we got industry professionals, the best of brand strategists, people in media. We got people who could give reputation advice. Because we knew that it's not about how well you kick a ball or how fast you run. It's actually also about how well you build your brand, because that's what attracts like-minded sponsorships. So we had a 2-day seminar and a summit, and we also invited a Harvard professor, Professor Anita Albiser, who also came in to kind of discuss the business of sports. And she works with global icons like your Dwayne Wade and your Jay-Z's. And we thought we really wanted to show our commitment into closing the sponsorship gap by getting the best in markets and the best brains to help the ladies kind of navigate this business of sports.
Babalwa, how important is it to have greater female representation in sports administration? We don't have a lot of women who are sitting, you know, I'll give you Cecilia Molokwane, for example, Lydia Munyapao, who is the Chief Executive Officer of SAFA, the first female, in fact, Chief Executive Officer of SAFA. We need to stop talking about it, you know, milestones in that manner. The first woman to do this, you know, especially in sport, because I would imagine that you'll agree that we will not get to the point we need to in terms of developing women's sport and getting women to actually make a living out of sport if we are not at least even putting women in positions of power in these sports federations. Would you agree that that is probably one of the biggest things that can help take, you know, the Springbok women, for example, to greater heights, where you do have a woman, you know, sitting beside Mark Alexander and leading, you know, in terms of getting that development for women's sport?
Yeah, I would somewhat agree. Excuse me. Ultimately, we would want to see, you know, we want to see women's sport be in a place where women's sport is led by women, because who else understands the needs of women athletes and even administrators more than the women themselves. But the investment also speaks to investing in the administrative development aspect of it, in the grassroots development aspect of it, and also all the way up to the professional aspect of it. So there needs to be a pipeline and a pathway where we can develop our own administrators, and as much as we are committed to developing our own athletes and ultimately reaching you know, a fully professional setup. So that is actually a dream of mine, that one day, perhaps even after my playing days, that we could see an increased amount of women who are playing great administrative roles. We are very much inspired by Cecilia Molokwane or Tumisani Chauke and the like, and I do believe that our future is incredibly bright and there is massive potential if only we could have intentional stakeholders tap into that.
And that is the question that I did ask Sindiwe at the start, to say, is there genuine confidence from women athletes that this gap, all of these gaps, media coverage, where we are, we're actually showing the leagues that women are involved in, that we are actually showing Babalwa playing for the Harlequins, on the sports channels, that, is there that confidence that you will be earning, maybe not as much as what, a Faf de Klerk, for example, is earning, or a Dwayne Vermeulen, for example, is earning, but that you will at least be able to make a living, a decent living out of sport? Do you genuinely believe that those gaps will close?
Indeed, I do. Perhaps not over the next 2 to 5 years. Perhaps over 10, even slightly more. Especially if I consider the fact that 3 years ago, the Springbok women never had contracts at all. We played because we loved the sport and we hoped that we would get paid for it via match fees, etc. Today, we are able to have steady salaries in the sense that we are fully contracted. Especially the 15 setup, because prior to 2 years ago, things like that never existed. So it is, a bit of a slow journey, but it is going somewhere. And you can see the pathway. We can see that the likes of FNB coming on board now, that, we are heading towards a place where we can earn, a proper living. Perhaps not as much as Siyakolisi and all that, but again, that is where we come in. That is where we are able to learn, especially through summits like the Women's Moving Sports Summits, where we are equipped, to be able to tap into some of the gaps that do exist. Be able to build your brand and leverage off of that. But from where I'm looking at the bigger picture, I do feel that, there is hope. We are headed in the right direction, albeit not at the pace that we want. However, there is lots of work that still needs to be done going forward.
And how do we fast track that, Sindiwe? What do I do as a sports journalist? What do you do as, sponsor? What does the ordinary South African do on the ground, where when you ask them, do you know who Latsha is? They don't even have to think twice about it, because when I ask, do you know who Siyakolisi is, they'll give you his history and where he comes from, but very few people know where Latsha comes from. So what do I do? What do you do? And what does the South African do to ensure that this journey that Babalwa speaks of, slow as it is, becomes faster?
So, as mentioned, at the center of sponsorship and at the center of closing this gap is visibility. So from a media perspective, playing or airing the games on free-to-air television is a good step, because then it allows more people to watch the sport and have access to it. Secondly, it is to every individual. With every game you watch and with every ticket that you buy, it increases that brand visibility for the players themselves. It creates demand, and then that then trickles down to the corporates. If when Babalwa plays, I'm guaranteed 9 million eyes or views are going to be watching her. It gives me the confidence that my brand is going to be exposed. And that's how we make our decision. If I have to choose between two players or two sports, and one gives me 1,000 eyes and the other gives me 10,000, of course I'm going to go for the one that gives me 10,000. Yeah. But again, as the population of South Africa, it is important that we also start supporting. Buy the tickets, go to stadium. And also then, again, with the ladies, it becomes important for them to actually also tell their story. Yeah. Because yes, Siyakolisi plays great rugby, but that's not the only reason that people are so drawn to him and brands are so drawn to him. He's been able to tell his story. He's been able to use his platforms to create a brand of himself where other corporates are able to link same values, and that's how he's getting sponsorships. So again, it's everybody has a role to play, even the ladies, and that's the kind of thing we were hoping to achieve with the Women in Sports Summits, just getting them those skills that they are able to tell their story and they're also able to attract sponsorships. Well,
I must say we do appreciate brands like Momentum, coming on and taking that gamble, because it is a gamble to bet on, a team that has not really drawn those eyes that brands feed off of in terms of making their revenue. But, it is, again, we say, a journey, one that we all need to be invested and involved in if we are to one day look at a Babalwa Latsha lifting the Women's Rugby World Cup title in front of hundreds of thousands of people. But Sindiwe, thank you so much for coming through. We leave it there with you.
Me.
And thank you, Babalwa, as well, for joining us. Of course, this has been an amazing conversation that we've been having, just talking about the disparities in women's sport. And we can only but hope that this is not a conversation we have, that the next time we have a conversation with women in sport, it is us celebrating the milestones that they've had, thanks to a lot of our contribution as the public.